you for attending the Ask Us Vaping and Making Connections to the Elementary Health and Physical Education Curriculum webinar. We're going to get started. Welcome and thank you for joining us today. My name is Andrea Haefele, and I am a health and physical education curriculum consultant at Ophea. I use the pronouns she, her, and hers. We're going to get started with our land acknowledgement. Our collective work takes place on traditional Indigenous territories all across Ontario. We are grateful to be able to work locally on these territories. As we move forward in these uncertain times, we acknowledge the enduring presence of Indigenous peoples on this land, including lessons they may have for us on the value of community, resiliency, cooperation, and determination. Ophea works across Ontario's education system in classrooms, in schools, and in school boards, working directly with educators, principals, school board leaders, public health professionals, and provincial stakeholders to bridge policy and practice, often in partnership, as we're doing today, with the Centre for Addiction and Mental Health. Let's go over some of the housekeeping items for today's webinar. This webinar is being recorded, and a recap blog will be developed to summarize discussions from today, and both of these will be provided to all registrants. All participants are in listen mode only, and we will be using the Q&A feature. So if you take a look at the bottom of your screen, you can see the Q&A feature. When you want to ask a question to our panelists, please use this feature to type in your question. You can choose to ask your question anonymously, and within this mode, only our team will be able to view the questions. We invite you to move around throughout the webinar as we connect and learn together. The session will focus on answering your questions about vaping, adopting a harm reduction approach, and strategies to address this topic using the health and physical education curriculum, including increasing understanding about vaping products and the effects of vaping on short and long-term health, increasing understanding of the importance of adopting a harm reduction approach when addressing vaping, including focusing on helping students understand the factors that affect decisions about vaping and develop the skills to make and support healthy, informed choices about vaping, increasing understanding of the linkages between mental health problems and problematic substance use associated with vaping, and learning about resources and supports available to support discussions and knowledge sharing. This webinar is provided for general information purposes only. For further information, individuals are advised to seek the advice of a physician or other healthcare professional. To ensure that we create a safe environment for this webinar, our intention is that the language we are all using and the questions we are asking and answering are respectful. Our priority is to also create a safe online space for the chat. To help set a common understanding of respect, we are sharing guidelines for respectful discussion from the Students' Commission website that is based on the principles of respect, listen, understand, communicate. In the chat box, when we show respect, we listen. When we listen, we understand. And when we understand, we can communicate. So if you take a look in your chat box, the links to what I referred to is right in there. Today, we will be hearing from Sarah Calvin from the Centre for Addiction and Mental Health. Can you give us a wave? Awesome. My colleague, Joanne Walsh, and myself will be guiding and joining the conversation, and look forward to your questions within the chat box. Sarah Calvin is a CAMH bilingual knowledge broker with a Master of Social Work and Bachelor of Education from the University of Toronto. She has a background in special education and in nonprofits supporting children and youth. Sarah uses she, her, hers pronouns and asks others to use these pronouns in reference to her. Joanne Walsh is an instructor in the Faculty of Education at Brock University and a curriculum consultant for Ophea. As a consultant, she has supported the development of resources and professional learning opportunities for teachers across the province. Joanne is passionate about health and physical education and supporting teachers in their work with children and youth to help all of their students acquire the comprehension, commitment, and capacity to lead healthy, active lives across their lifespan. Joanne uses she, her, hers pronouns and asks others to use these pronouns in reference to her. I am Andrea Haefele, and I am a health and physical education teacher in the York Region District School Board, currently seconded as a curriculum consultant at Ophea, and a member of the Ontario Association for the Support of Physical and Health Educators. I've been part of many regional and provincial initiatives that support the health and physical education curriculum, healthy schools, and also daily physical activity. I use she, her, hers pronouns and ask others to use these pronouns in reference to me. So we received many questions upon your registration to this webinar. What we've done is we've grouped these questions into specific themes. What Sarah will be doing is addressing your questions through these themes. And then Joanne and myself will make connections to the curriculum while providing strategies and approaches and also sharing our own personal experiences. In addition to the questions submitted during registration, once again, we welcome you to use the Q&A feature in this session to ask any questions that you have. We will try our best to get to everyone's questions. However, we only have limited time. We will be providing a summary blog recap on this webinar along with the recording in late April. Okay, are you ready? Awesome. Okay, so when all the questions started coming in, we've received a lot of questions about what is vaping, why do our children and youth need to know about it, what is the attraction? Sarah, I'm going to throw it to you. Can you share your expertise and knowledge in terms of the basics of vaping?
Yeah, so I might start just by sharing my screen. I've prepared some slides for us. So first, I just wanted to also introduce myself and the work that I do at CAMH to help everyone get a sense of the lens that I'm bringing to this conversation and the kinds of questions I may be able to answer. I work at the department that's called the Provincial System Support Program at CAMH. We call it PSSP for short. And what PSSP does is really looks at the mental health and addiction system across the province. So I've got a quick little graphic for us here, thinking about the system across the province. So we're not necessarily working with individual clients on issues around mental health and addiction. Instead, we're looking at the system. And our work is really aimed at creating and sustaining improvements to that system. So then my particular role at PSSP is as a knowledge broker. And that means I'm someone who connects people with evidence. And that's really what I'm here to do with all of you today, is to connect you with evidence related to vaping that can help you in your teaching practice. And so as Andrea mentioned in my quick little bio, my background is actually in education and social work. Those are the lenses that I bring. I'm not a researcher and I'm not a clinician who has expertise in the area of substance use and vaping in particular. So I'm here to share evidence, a lot of research evidence, but then as the case may arise, I might be able to share some lived experience evidence that has been shared with me to inform these conversations as well. So I know we're going to get started about what are the basics of vaping. And I've got a video from Health Canada that can explain it much better than I could do. And then I'll kind of recap what we learned in the video at the end to think about what are the takeaways that you want to take home with you.
Vaping. How much do you know about it? Let's take a deeper look. Vaping devices come in all shapes and sizes. Most consist of a battery, a heating element, a tank or reservoir, and a mouthpiece. The vaping liquid in the reservoir contains a solvent like propylene glycol and/or glycerol, and flavors consisting of chemicals. Many also contain varying levels of nicotine, the same highly addictive substance found in cigarettes. Vaping products do not contain tobacco and do not involve burning or producing smoke. Vaping devices work by heating vaping liquid to form an aerosol that is inhaled through the user's mouth and lungs, where it is absorbed into the bloodstream. Vaping is less harmful than smoking. However, that doesn't mean it is without risks. Vaping is not intended for youth and non-smokers. Take a closer look. Visit canada.ca/vaping. A message from the Government of Canada.
Yeah, so that video is available online if you ever want to use it, perhaps with your students. I'll leave it to you to decide if it fits with what you're teaching. But some things to highlight there is that it's not that nothing is necessarily burning, but there is a heating of liquids to form a vapor. And no, it is not water vapor. It does contain chemicals. And the other thing to highlight there is that most of the products on the market do contain nicotine. So we'll talk about that a little bit later when we think about some of the risks associated with vaping. And then also most of the products out there are flavored. And we can also talk about that a little bit later and its appeal to youth. So that's kind of where I'll stop in terms of the basics of vaping, but I will leave you with some resources that go into some more detail. The first one on the list here was developed in partnership between CAMH and School Mental Health Ontario. So it's directed specifically for teachers, and we also have some fact sheets for youth as well. And then a few links to some Health Canada resources as well. So I think then before I move on from here, there was also a question about the reasons that young people might be engaging in vaping. So I'll touch on that as well. So Health Canada has done some research on that. And some of the common responses they're getting is around curiosity. The flavors are appealing. They're trying vaping to fit in, or other social influences. So maybe not necessarily peer pressure, but if their friends are doing it, then that is a social influence. And then some also saying that vaping reduces stress. So those are some that are specific to vaping, but we can also think about the reasons why people engage in different substance use behaviors more broadly. And I think what's really important is just to remember that there can be so many different reasons. Each person can have a different reason, and then each person in different situations might have different reasons. So it's just really important not to bring any assumptions. Not necessarily assuming that if a student is vaping, it's because they've given into peer pressure. And also on the flip side, not assuming that if they're vaping, then there's some serious mental health problem that needs addressing there. Ultimately, people are engaging in these behaviors because they're getting something out of it in the moment, whether it's the physical effects or the social effects, or maybe some mental or emotional effects. So it's just important to be open to all of those possibilities and to be ready to have genuine conversations with students. So I may pass it over there and see if Andrea and Joanne, you want to make any connections to the curriculum or teaching strategies.
Yeah, I really liked how you mentioned in your last point in terms of understanding and being aware that the reasons of why someone would choose vaping, whatever grade they are coming from. It reminds me in my role as an educator that the healthy living strand is set up so that there are many topics that we need to address according to the curriculum, but there are topics that we need to approach with additional sensitivity and care because of the personal nature that vaping of where it comes from, exactly what you were saying, right? Sometimes we're not able to see the invisible part of our students' lives in terms of their cultural norms, what their home life is, right? So before talking about these topics where we have to be more aware of just the implications of how it's connected to the students and their experiences, we really need to make sure that our role as educators is creating that safe space when talking about topics such as vaping, right? And at the beginning, I referenced the Students' Commission's 4 pillars, where we really have to just pause and be able to listen and understand the why and finding out the roots of, okay, this is an excellent teachable moment. If our students are showing a lot of curiosity in vaping, or we see that it's coming out in terms of just outside of the classroom, this is a really great teachable moment in terms of connecting what they are seeing, hearing, learning outside of the classroom to the curriculum. So I think right away in the primary grades, right? My son is in grade 3. They are learning about the facts of smoking, nicotine, vaping. And then as they move higher towards the older grades, they're starting to learn about the short and long-term effects, exactly what you were sharing in your resource. And slowly, as they move to the older grades, that's when, once they have all that foundations of the what and the why, they're building on strategies on how to make those safe choices, right? And understanding the warning signs and the consequences when making the safest choice for whatever position they are in. Joanne, I'm just curious to know your experience in terms of what you see in your experience as a secondary educator, and how you can use those teachable moments and creating those safe spaces, and how it may link to what we're doing in the elementary panel. Oh, you got to unmute. Joanne, you got to unmute.
That's the 2021, you're on mute, right? So thank you, sorry for that. Absolutely everything affirmed that you had said, Andrea, about lots of connects to the curriculum and lots of reasons why students may be trying these behaviors. And when we're in a high school setting, or we see students coming out of the elementary panel into the secondary panel, we need to think about the fact too that they're sort of pre-tweens, teens, and their brains are kind of developing into that risk-taking curiosity behavior. And so that when we see those behaviors happen, or students are talking about those behaviors, we have to take it into account, just the fact that part of what youth and teenagers do is a lot of exploring around different things, and it may not be a habit for a lifetime, or it may be tried once or twice, or curiosity. So really important to think about that around approaching it from student-centered. Let's talk about that. Why are we asking these questions? What are you more curious to learn about? And the other part too is that I'm always cognizant of, is when speaking with vaping and any other substance use, is that this is very much connected to our students' lives outside of school and their youth. So they also could potentially be vaping illegal substances, not just substances that are harmful, but illegal substances. And as youth, obviously it's illegal. So we really have to think about their choices that are very different from an adult choice. And that the home concept and the home experience is that they may have caregivers who choose to vape, and vape for a very different reason, for stress reduction, or as a smoking cessation program, or just as a substance, just like alcohol and caffeine and all of those things. So that when I think about it as an educator, I always want to think about the two contexts, about the exploration, about adults in their community and making connections and bias, and just really bringing it from a safe space for students to be able to talk about it.
Thank you. And just really, I like how you reiterated the reasons why, right? Not just the students of reasons why, but who they see around them and what their reasons are, right? From an adult's perspective, like you said. And I like how you mentioned that creating that safe space should be across all grades too, because it's really important that, you know what, schools are the place to provide this knowledge, that factual information that help them make those healthy choices. Thank you, Joanne. Once again, I'm going to remind everyone that if you have any questions, please feel free to use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. We're going to go on to our second theme, because there were a lot of questions that centered around research, current stats, and just interest in terms of understanding the prevalence of student use within vaping. Sarah, can you share with us in terms of some overviews of just the stats and data that you have with this?
For sure. So I'll share my screen again. So I'll share some data that comes from what we call the OSDIF survey. There we go. So this is the Ontario Student Drug Use and Health Survey that's conducted at CAMH, and it's an ongoing survey that we do every 2 years. And it's been going on since 1977. So it's actually the longest ongoing school survey in Canada. So I'm going to be referring to it as the OSDIS, so don't be alarmed by the acronym. We love our acronyms. I'll just give you a quick little overview of the kind of data that was collected to help contextualize the results. So we do survey thousands of students in over 200 schools in Ontario, both elementary and secondary. However, we're only surveying grades 7 through 12. So I know I'm speaking to an elementary panel audience here. Unfortunately, the only elementary grades that are captured in the data is from 7 to 12. Or sorry, 7 and 8. But I think we can still sort of learn some things about what it's important to address in the elementary grades from some of this data. And the other note is just that this is considered to be representative of all grades 7 to 12 students in Ontario's publicly funded schools. So the first thing I wanted to look at was vaping in context of some of the other drug use measures that we look at in the OSDIS survey. So when we look at grades 7 through 12 overall, vaping is the third most reported substance use measure. But when we look just at the grades 7 and 8, I've plotted here the other substance use measures that are actually a bit higher than vaping. And vaping falls 6th, so behind high caffeine energy drinks, prescription opioid pain relievers, alcohol, cough or cold medication, and inhalants. And then I've also put cannabis on there just to show where it falls in context as well. So this kind of, it raises the question, so, what's the big deal? Why are we talking about it? But what is interesting about the vaping stats is that over time, as we've been measuring these drug use measures over a long period of time, we've seen that in general, fewer and fewer students are using these different substances over the years. Vaping, on the other hand, we've been tracking since 2015, and it's actually been increasing. So it's not following the same patterns as some of the other substance use measures that we track. So that's sort of one of the reasons that we're talking about it here. And the other thing is that not only has it been increasing, it was the only drug use measure to increase between 2017 and 2019, but it actually doubled. So it went from 11% of students said they had vaped in the past year in 2017. And then in 2019, 23% of students said they had vaped in the past year. And so that means they vaped more than a few puffs, but we don't know necessarily, was this habitual or was it just once? So that gives you a little bit of a sense of what the data does tell us and what it doesn't tell us. So next, let's look at what was actually in those vaping products that students were using. So we see that 56% of them did contain nicotine. So this is really the primary substance that is being vaped. But then we also have a pretty big chunk that people were using both nicotine and non-nicotine products, and then about 18% non-nicotine products. And then 6% said they weren't sure what was in the product that they vaped. The other substance to think about, of course, is cannabis. So the rates of vaping as a method of consumption for cannabis have been increasing as well over the years. So we've got in 2015, 5% of the people, of the students who used cannabis said they did so by vaping. And then in 2019, that had doubled. So 10% of students had said that they used cannabis by vaping. So we'll talk a little bit about both nicotine and cannabis when we get into some of the health effects. As we know, both of these substances can have an impact on developing brain. But I think something that I did also want to highlight is the 6% that are not sure, because I think this really connects well to the curriculum and the idea of supporting students to make informed decisions about their health. So I know I've got one more slide to show before I throw the mic back to Andrea and Joanne, but this is something that I'm sure we'll talk about. So finally, I know there were some questions coming in about how prevalent is vaping in grade 7, in grade 8. Unfortunately, I don't have the data for grade 6 and below, but this gives us a good starting point. So as you can see just visually from this chart, the rates of vaping do increase by grade. And when you run the stats on it, you'll find that it is a statistically significant increase each grade. And this is true for vaping overall. So students who said, yes, they vaped in the past year, but it's also true for students who vaped frequently. And so in our survey, frequently means daily or weekly. So I think I've added some more numbers in there for you. Here we go. So in grade 8, 2.3% of students had vaped frequently. And by grade 12, it was up to 21%. And so each grade, that there is a statistically significant increase there as well. But I think one thing that really stands out to me just visually looking at this chart is how huge the jump is from grade 8 to grade 9. And I think that's something that we can definitely talk about here as elementary educators. Why do we need to be talking about vaping in the elementary panel? So I'll throw that over to Andrea and Joanne.
Yeah, I'm just like wowed every time I see this chart as you were preparing for this, as we lead up to the session today. As good teaching pedagogy, it's really important that we take the time to know our learners and the communities that they are coming from. One thing that I know that Joanne and I were discussing is that these statistics are very alarming. I'm just looking, as you noted, from grade 8 to grade 9, but it would be interesting to also connect with the schools that you're working with, the public health nurse. I know in my school, a public health nurse is tied to my school where I can connect with her to get resources and supports whenever I'm addressing different topics in the healthy living strand. So a suggestion that I'm giving out there is that take the time to connect with your public health nurse to find out that data, that local data within that community, and making meaning of that as an educator, and also using that data to share with your students to get them to understand, okay, why is the stats moving, why is the trend moving up like that? And why is it such a big jump between grade 8 and grade 9, right? I like what you were mentioning as you were starting to talk with the beginning of this theme is finding out the why, right? And is it because of anxiety? Is it because of stress, peer pressure, moving from the elementary to the secondary? And when I think about my role as an educator and where the health and physical education curriculum fits in, is that the way the overall expectations are set up in the healthy living strand, it gives us permission to use our professional judgment as teachers to make the connections within this topic of vaping to health concepts, making healthy choices, and what's the best healthy choice for you and the circumstances you are in, right? We did a lot of talk as Joanne and I were prepping for this in terms of even approaching this topic from an inquiry-based approach. And Joanne, I'm going to ask you if you can share with us your knowledge and experience of how you can use the inquiry-based approach to helping students better understand not just the stats of vaping, but how it connects to them and where they are in the community and the age and stage they are at.
Yeah. Thank you, Andrea. There is just if you're not aware, and it was just posted in the chat, an inquiry-based learning guide for health and physical educators. So depending where you are in your journey to understanding inquiry-based learning and the power of it, starting out or well on your way, I would suggest that you grab that link and keep it aside, and then know that you can go and use it, because there's a lot of direction there. I find that by the time we're teaching intermediate students, and that would be from grade 7 to grade 10, they've had a fair amount of learning around substance use and addictions. And oftentimes when you're talking about facts and data, you get the, we've heard this already, we've done this already, I've seen that video already, those kinds of things. So inquiry-based learning is a great way to flip it. And some of this data I've used with students to actually show them the data, talk about the data, and ask them some questions. So the example is, how come vaping is, the prevalence of vaping is going up leaps and bounds according to the chart between those 2 years? What's going on with you? Is that representative of our community? Is that representative of our school? Why might you think are all the different reasons? Let's go out and investigate that and see that. Should it matter? Should we be concerned about that? Should you be concerned about that? So those kinds of leading questions. There's lots and lots and lots of data out there that we can, and information we can provide to our students, but, you know, taking an approach with intermediate students to give them all of that information and have them make sense of it, then it kind of brings it into their brain this way. And then to ask them to ask their own questions about that. Why should this matter to you? What are you learning that you need to think more about in terms of you or your behaviors or your friend's behavior that, you know, you care about, you know, and the decisions that you're making and where you might be and where you might not be. So I don't know if you've heard of the CRAP test, CRAAP, which is one of the great ways where you have students evaluate for currency. Example of these stats, are they current and relevant to our community? Where did these stats come from? Because students are very much questioning about the authority of information, because at that age, that's part of what they do. They question all authority. And who says that? I don't believe that. So it's great to have students look at different sources, as well as, you know, the purpose of that information and what they can do with that. So I encourage you to think about that a little bit. And then finally, just paying attention to this big jump between 7 and 8. I think as educators in the elementary panel, we can also look at that and say, so what is it that my students may need to know, learn, be able to do, think about in grade 4, 5, 6 to have an impact on that rate of grade 7 and grade 8. I don't have data for 4, 5, 6, but I can see that there's using in 7 and 8. So what kinds of conversations am I having at my junior level with students about thinking about it before they have an opportunity? And finally, with grade 8s, what kinds of conversations are we having with them around that transition to high school, when it's a completely big change of social group, big change of location, big change in routine, far more autonomous, far more independent, far more time on their own, lots of places in the school that are not supervised that they can go to. And those tend to be sometimes the things that are drawing in at the grade 9 level. So as grade 8 educators, how are we having conversations about vaping and substance use and those social emotional learning skills? Really, really critical, about critically and creatively thinking about that and coping mechanisms and all of those things to maybe try to affect that data in a more positive way in the grade 9. So there's a lot of great stuff here that we can use with our students at 7, 8 to really prepare them for grade 9. And to address the topic in a different way. Thank you, Andrea.
Thank you. I really liked how you also shared being a critical thinker as an educator too, right? And it's not just delivering the expectations, but using the teachable moments, such as these stats that Sarah has shared. And even if you were to be able to get a hold of the stats from your local community or your public health nurses, leveraging these statistics in how it relates to the curriculum, because that's when the learning is more meaningful for your students, especially knowing the community that they're coming from, right? Thank you.
And Sarah, Andrea, let me say one more thing. When I work with new teachers in terms of the faculty, and one of the things they want to know a lot about is the background information, the data and stats. And what I try to get them to understand is our students are incredible critical thinkers, very savvy now around navigating information. So we can sort of give that away a little bit and not have to be that knower and that sage and that thinker, but know how to facilitate students navigating data and information to really make sense of it. So I know we're concerned about needing to know about a topic. there's other ways to approach it as an educator that can still be enriching without being afraid to approach the topic, because we don't have the background knowledge, understanding, or facts that we might necessarily need.
Yeah, and I think that I'm hoping that what you are saying is making it more comfortable for educators to know that you don't need to know it all, right? It's the approach and the strategies that we're hoping that people are learning from this session, so that they are better equipped to approach topics that they might not be the knowledge broker on, right?
That's right. What questions do you ask your students to help them think about what they're seeing, what they're learning, what they want to know more about? They ask you a question about something, a great opportunity to take them on that trail of discovery in a guided way, in a facilitated way.
Yeah.
But a discovery around, where do I find the information and what do I need? Where do I need to go? And did I get the information that I needed to answer my question? It's a rich learning experience at all grades, not just intermediate.
And a huge transferable skill that they can use whenever they approach other experiences and within other curriculum areas too, right?
Absolutely, absolutely.
There was a question that just came in, and it leads right perfectly into our third theme, which is about risks associated with vaping. Sarah, there was a question that came in that was asking in terms of vaping, how addicted is it, and how is it harmful to your body, and how does it affect your body? Can you share your experience in terms of the risks that you can share with our educators, and what do we need to know about that?
Sure, yeah. And even better, I've got some slides for that as well. You'll see me skipping over some slides that are more data from the OSDIS survey. So I know the link has been shared out in the chat, so definitely go in there. There's a whole section on vaping related stats. So I'm loving the conversation about using that with your students directly. And it's updated every 2 years. So keep your eyes peeled for that. So in terms of the risks, one thing I just wanted to start off with before we even get into the risks, in case you listen to this section and then you have to go and you tune out and you don't get to hear the part about how to broach these things with your students, I just wanted to say that these things aren't necessarily a list of things that you turn around and use with your students to persuade them not to vape, right? We want to build trusting relationships where students, no matter what choices they make, are able to come in and speak openly about it. So I just wanted to caution there before we even start talking about the risks. So first, let's talk about some of the short-term risks. So you can see up here, we've got some things related to inhaling the aerosol. So maybe some irritation in the mouth or throat, potentially some coughing, shortness of breath, or nausea. Those are some of the things that students might experience, or someone who vapes might experience. Another risk that we talk about a lot with youth is the spread of illnesses. And I know we talk about this even more these days with COVID, but when students are vaping, often they're doing so in a social situation and sharing the vaping product among a group of friends. So this can spread different illnesses. I kind of am curious to learn, what will the next results say about this? This may reduce with all the education that's happening around public health with COVID. And then another short-term risk that is actually really quite a big risk for young students is nicotine toxicity. And so this can happen when the liquid from the vape product, which contains nicotine, comes in contact with the skin, or if someone were to accidentally swallow it. It is poisonous, and so it can cause quite a severe reaction. There have actually been some deaths as a result of this. So it is really important to sort of teach around safety when it comes to vaping products. And people who do use vaping products need to be really careful with the liquids inside of them. So this is something that is also really relevant at the elementary level, since it is an even higher risk for young students who may be super curious about things that maybe they find around their house or in a group of friends. So then when we get to the long-term risks, we really don't know very much. And so I've just sort of put this quote up from Health Canada that is saying, the long-term health impacts of vaping are unknown, but we do have enough evidence to suggest that young people and non-smokers should not start, and we should try and prevent people who are not smokers or youth from starting to vape. So we'll talk a little bit about that and why that is and what is some of the evidence that we have so far. So even though we don't know a lot for sure, because the research is still quite early days. And actually, you know what, I wanted to start off with why is it unknown? Because that's sort of a question we might have too. So one thing that makes it difficult to know is just because vaping is fairly new. And so the research is still quite new. But then the other thing is that, we don't necessarily know the impacts of inhaling some of these chemicals. A lot of the things that are inside of vaping products have been deemed safe for consumption. In fact, some of them are even used in certain food products, but we don't actually know the impact of inhaling that product as opposed to consuming it in food. Another thing that makes it difficult to know is that different vaping products can be really, really different. So we talked about how most of the vaping products out there do contain nicotine, but the amount of nicotine in each product can vary widely from quite a minimal amount to actually more nicotine than a cigarette. So that is also going to have an impact on the health risks as well. But then also just the composition of the vape itself, and how, the battery power that it uses and how hot it gets, and how often the person is using it. So the person's behavior with their vape, that can all have an impact on the amount of chemicals that are being created, and therefore the amount of risks that might be associated in the long term. But so we sort of said earlier, we'll talk about nicotine, we'll talk about cannabis. And so these are two substances that are commonly found in vapes among youth. And we know that these substances can have an impact on young people's health in the long term. So for nicotine, it is a really addictive substance. And so young people who are exposed to nicotine are more likely to develop an addiction than someone who's exposed to it as an adult. And then both nicotine and cannabis can have impacts on the brain, and which can also be linked to memory and concentration and impulse control. So I know, Joanne, I think you had a note about talking about brain development with students. So I'll pass it over to you.
Thanks, Sarah. I'm definitely not an expert in brain development, but it is also definitely a part of the 2019 elementary health and physical education curriculum, talking about students and developing brains. So it's really important to bring that into the equation, particularly with students. And, when you Google the word vape, or you do a word search with vape in the elementary curriculum, the conversation starts at grade 4 and then sort of repeats. And we'll talk a little bit more about where the expectations actually fit in a little bit, but it's never too early to start talking about habits and behaviors do affect your brain in the way it might affect your learning, or it might affect your performance, or it might affect your brain's long-term health. So it's a great opportunity to bring that into the equation, and why any of these substances, and vaping particularly, but other substances like cannabis, is that it has a different effect, or more potent effect on the developing brain than the mature brain, so children versus adults. And so it's a great opportunity to have students think about that as well, right at the very beginning, from grade 4, 5, 6 on. And then when we're talking about in the later conversations with students, where they think about those behaviors and habits that they're using regularly on a day-to-day basis, how is that affecting their academic performance, their sport performance, their work performance. And so really wanting to make connects to students that it is brain chemistry, and they need to think about it, because students still think about, what about my lungs? What's the effect on my lungs? And we haven't really made connections to that brain chemistry yet, and the changes in brain chemistry that can happen. So for those educators, when you're thinking about it and you're looking at those expectations from grade 4 on, and we're talking about not just about mental health, but brains, we want to start that conversation early about grade 4, 5, 6 around how that affects the brain.
Thank you. It's really important. Like I think about in elementary and how my school organizes and timetables health, right? Health class. And in my school, many teachers who teach the health, they're just coming in down from grade 8, going into grade 4, teaching that health class and leaving that. And it's really important to, like what Joanne said, is understanding, yes, this is what you have to teach if you are teaching just grade 4 in healthy living, but understanding the scope and sequence of where the learning is going from grade 4 all the way through to the secondary level where you are at, right, Joanne? In grade 4, the learning expectations, that's where they start getting the facts. And as they move older, they're learning about refusal skills, safe choices, and implications of, if I choose to do this, exactly what Joanne says, how does this affect my body and the decisions that are made if I do choose to vape or be around people who vape, right? It's really important that we use the term, and it was in our session description, of the harm reduction approach, right? That we're not using the scare tactics of, okay, these are your long-term and short-term risks. That might not mean anything to our students at that age and stage, but really finding those effective teaching strategies that we're already doing already, like whether it be think, pair, share, 4 corners, but how are you using those teaching strategies to get them to approach topics such as vaping so that they realize the implications, not just legal and not legal, but the social implications in terms of how are they affecting their body and mind in the now, right? But thank you for mentioning that, Joanne, because I really think it's, as an elementary educator, I like hearing what you see at the secondary and what I can do to in the now, so that, okay, can we actually change what the stats are doing as they go into your level?
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to move into Sarah. Do you wanted to? I'm going to look in the Q&A. I think we've addressed that question in terms of risks. Do you have any more slides within the risks associated theme right now, or do you want to jump into? Are you more comfortable jumping into the 4th topic right now?
You know, I've got some, I know there were questions about vaping versus smoking and, you know, is it better? But I think that I want to make sure we have time to talk about harm reduction just because it is so important.
I agree.
Let's go on ahead.
Let's do it.
Yeah, so I know, I've got some resources here related to the risks of vaping that can be shared out as well. Yeah, I know there were a lot of questions about harm reduction and, you know, is it a good strategy? You know, how do you bring it into the classroom? What does it really mean? I will start by just giving a bit of an overview about some of the principles, and then we'll have more of a discussion of how can those principles get translated into the classroom or into the school environment. And I also wanted to put out there that back in January, I know Ophea did a live Facebook chat with CSSDP, the Canadian Students for Sensible Drug Policy, and they talk a lot about what harm reduction is. That conversation was in connection to cannabis in particular, but it's absolutely applicable to vaping as well. So they're much better experts than myself in the area of harm reduction, so I do suggest you check that out as well. So what is harm reduction? There's sort of 2 main things that I wanted to bring up here. Some people might think about harm reduction in terms of a set of really practical strategies that people who use drugs can use in order to reduce any harms they might encounter through that drug use. And so that's super important. But we're going to talk more about the other piece of harm reduction, which I think can have an impact in really every grade and in your approach in talking about drug use and vaping with students. And this is the side that is more of a philosophy, and it's based on respecting the rights of people who use drugs. And so in the next slide, we'll get into what are some of the principles of harm reduction in that sense of philosophy. And so how can you embody these principles in your teaching practice? I also just wanted to say these are not like the 4 principles of harm reduction. These are just a few that I've pulled from various sources that I think are relevant. And I know it's always easier to work with fewer at the beginning when you're learning something than to get a list of 20 at the same time. So there's lots more to learn after this webinar, and I've got some resources for you to do that as well. So the first principle to talk about here is the recognition that drug use does happen. And this is not about, being permissive or, desensitizing ourselves to youth substance use, but rather it's about recognizing that as much as we might have prevention efforts, students will still use different drugs, students will still engage in vaping, and it's better to just recognize that, because when we ignore it, we end up stigmatizing it, and we don't provide the right support so that it can be done in a safe way. The next one is about putting safety and well-being of the person above this goal of abstinence. And so, of course, recognizing that abstinence from substance use is really the one and only way to guarantee absolute risk-free, but it's not a reality for everyone. And so we actually have to put the person's safety and well-being first. And abstinence can be a goal for someone if they have selected that as a goal. And then we recognize that progress towards that goal is incremental and should be based on evidence-based approaches. Next, we've got this principle of non-judgment, compassion, and dignity, which perhaps seems obvious or a no-brainer that everyone's trying to do that in their day-to-day life. But it does actually need to be said, because there is a history of people who use drugs being marginalized. And so this is the idea that, if someone does use drugs, they don't forfeit their rights to quality services, for example, or their rights to dignity. And then I think something that connects well to this principle is the reminder that I've put as a quote at the bottom of the slide. So it comes from the National Harm Reduction Coalition. And I'll just read it for you because I couldn't say it better myself. So harm reduction recognizes that the realities of poverty, class, racism, social isolation, past trauma, sex-based discrimination, and other social inequalities affect both people's vulnerability to and capacity for effectively dealing with drug-related harms. So I think we all need to have that also in the back of our mind when we go into these situations with non-judgment. And then finally, the principle that I think we'll have a lot to talk about here is about empowerment. And this is the idea that we really want to empower the individual to make choices for their own health. And that's what I see a lot when I read the various substance use pointers in the curriculum. So it's not about a professional deciding what's best for the individual. Rather, it's about empowering that person with the information and the tools to make those choices for themselves. So I think with that, I'll pass it off to Andrea and Joanne.
Yeah, I really love this graphic because it's almost just giving us the tools on how to approach this topic in a sensitive way. I like how your arrow is pointing at the empowerment, because that's the end goal, right? We want all of our learners to have the independence to make those informed choices in the scenario, their stage, or the age they are at, whether they're in grade 1 in the primary grades or they're in the secondary level where Joanne is teaching, right? I want to pull back a bit in terms of where we were addressing at the beginning of the session in terms of the why, right? Taking the time to approach it in a non-judgment, compassionable way when a student starts showing curiosity of it, or a student who is using it, right? Why are they using it? What is the root of it? So when we think about the harm reduction approach is, I make straight connections with our social and emotional learning skills, right? Where, okay, if we see those stats that Sarah was showing before, why are the stats jumping so big from grade 8 to grade 9, right? Are we teaching them or embedding those social emotional skills where where we're teaching them how to manage their emotions? Are there sources of stress that we don't know about that our students in that specific community are experiencing? And are we teaching them healthy coping strategies, right? If maybe that's the reason why they are going towards vaping. And how can we help them become critical and creative thinking learners, right? Like what Joanne was saying, using that inquiry-based approach allows them to think instead of just regurgitating stats and what does the teacher want to hear, right? That might not even be important for them right now in terms of what they're dealing with outside of the classroom too, right? Joanne, can you share in terms of what you see in the secondary level of where when the students are making those healthy choices and how it connects to what do we need to do as elementary educators and talking about it before they actually get into it?
Well, I think one of the things that we talk often about, and you can see it through our scope and sequence of our curriculum, is that we might start from a prevention approach, talking very early and young with students to try to get them to make decisions, use those social emotional skills to make good decisions, not to start into those habits. But definitely well along the way, we can see with the stats that students are already in using and different habits. And so at that point, we are flipped into a harm reduction approach. And the curriculum, all of the language is about making safer personal choices for them. And that's the really, I think, cornerstone of harm reduction. And we do see it on our curriculum is all about, we know that saying, just telling our student, no, don't do it. It doesn't, we know it doesn't work. And students have told us in many, many student voice surveys to say, just let me make my decisions, but help me guide my decisions through giving me the information I need to know. Just don't try to scare me, right? And that, just scare me into doing it or not doing it because it doesn't work. And so I think as educators, we need to think about that. So I want to talk a little bit about things that we use around, it was posted in the chat, which is the resource is writable tools. And these are tools that you can go on to Ophea. They're links you can pull off and you can put right onto your own student classroom platforms, Google Classroom, whatever, and students can, populate those right away. You can use them in your classroom as hard copy. And there are things like, and we use things like think, pair, share, or four corner activities, right? Or asking a student a question and say, is it yes sometimes or no, and having them think through that. Giving them different data like Sarah has shown, or different images like Sarah has shown, and having them do a gallery walk and talk about what they see in that image and make connections to themselves in that image. A placemat with some sort of data or statement or whatever it happens to be, and have them talk through it. Because we know that when students start to have, when they have that purposeful talk, just like in any classroom, that purposeful talk and talking to each other in smaller groups, that's really where we get them to start thinking about everything we're trying to teach them and make those healthy decisions. So that's one of the things that we really try to promote in terms of using those teachable tools and then putting them on your Google Classroom if you happen to be teaching virtually right now, where students can do a shared document and populate them around this topic. Another resource that can help out is if you take a look, you'll find on Ophea, and somebody will put the link in the chat. It's called Ideas for Action Cannabis. And if you take the word cannabis out and you put the word vaping in, you can use all of those activities to support talking about vaping along with cannabis and along with those habits at a classroom approach, at a school approach, and at a community approach. And those are activities that can be used in class lessons or in the school as part of a healthy school that not only, again, gives students the kind of information they need to make these healthy decisions early on, but also to how do they become advocates for quality, or not quality, but advocates for healthier choices or thinking about your choices without that stigma. And Sarah, I really like when Sarah talked about stigma, because we see that already. We see it in elementary school and we see it in high school around the kids and the kind of labels that kids get. And talking about these habits in terms of stigmatizing about it's good or bad, all we're actually doing is stigmatizing our student population. So I'm going to encourage us early and young to have these conversations about it's a behavior. It's a behavior, and why is the behavior happening, and where do you sit on the plane of that behavior, and using those Ophea tools as well as the ideas for action. And there are some references to vaping to start having these conversations with their students. Andrea, do you want to talk about the grade 4 unit on substance use and vaping, or do you want me to roll into it?
Yeah, roll into it. I'm just being aware of the time right now.
Okay, the last thing I'm going to mention to everyone is that grade 4 on teaching tools, the elementary lesson plans, the newly published grade 4 substance use, you'll see it, it's got a green box around it. Substance use in grade 4, there's 5 lessons in the unit, and all 5 lessons are all on vaping and making connections. So I would encourage you, in terms of the elementary folks who are in the junior folks on it, go in there, take a look. There's some in grade 5 as well. Grade 6, 7, 8, you make connections to the overall curriculum expectations and use that the ideas for action cannabis. Lots of great stuff there, as well as use some of those teachable, those writable tools to really get kids talking and using the information from a student-centered questioning approach. And back to you, Andrea.
Thank you. You are not alone. Okay, so there will be it's great to see your perspective, because it really helps guide and gives us permission of what do we need to do now, right? I wanted to let all the participants know that there will be another vaping related webinar coming up this school year. There are also other resources on this topic that are currently in development. We want you to stay connected by signing up for the e-connection. You'll see that link in your chat box, and follow us on social media at Ophea Canada. Feel free to tag us to continue the learning. Stay tuned, as we will be sharing the recap blog and the recording from this webinar with you in late April. And one last thing before you head out, please take a moment to fill out the survey on today's webinar, also in the chat box. And thank you so much, Sarah and Joanne, for your time, expertise, and energy. It was a pleasure planning the session with you. And thank you to all the participants for coming on in and joining us today. Make sure that you get some time outside today. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, folks. Thanks for joining.
Thank you.